Welcome to Suburban Warrior, the podcast that will impact, inspire, and empower you to transform your mindset and become the badass warrior that you are. I'm your host and fellow warrior, Kirstin Piper, former clinician and corporate marketing exec turned multi-passionate entrepreneur, performance and life coach, and mom to 4 not-so-little warriors. Each week, I will bring you honest conversations with inspiring guests to share their stories of resilience, optimism, success, and simple yet effective strategies so that you transform your thoughts and change your behavior to get the results you want in your life. You will be empowered to take action, warrior up, and believe in you. Let's do this. What's up, warriors? Welcome back to this week's episode of Suburban Warrior Podcast. My guest today is, of course, you guessed it, another suburban warrior here to share her really impactful story because she's really on a mission to heal mental health. And I think it is, really part of what Suburban Warrior is all about. So Kirstin Day has more than 18 years experience as a senior executive in the fashion industry in New York City. She's a mom of 2, an avid equestrian, and the lover of art and music. Mental health has always been her passion since struggling with an eating disorder, depression, and anxiety in her teens. In 2012, she combined her business experience and interest in helping others to form Strength is Beautiful, a platform and series of educational programs for children, teens, their parents, and industry professionals about eating disorders, mental health, and their effects, with a focus on promoting health, confidence, and positive self-image. Kirstin has spoken to a wide range of audiences, including multiple times at the Sidney Kimmel Medical College at Jefferson Hospital as a keynote speaker and also locally. Kirstin believes that our society needs to be talking more about opening up about mental health, and it is her mission to do just that. Welcome, Kirstin.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for being here. And I'm really excited because I think our missions are very similar. In, Suburban Warrior is all about mindset and mental health. And, so much of us really focus on our health physically, which of course is extremely important. But I think the whole dialogue and around mental health needs to be louder, out there more, talking about it more. And, I'm really excited to talk to you about it. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so glad we were able to connect. It seems like we're very much aligned on our mission. So
absolutely. Okay. So, in your bio, we talk about all of the things you experienced as a teenager, right? Anxiety, depression, eating disorder. So tell us about your story and as a child and all those things that you've experienced, how that has shaped your life.
Yeah. I think that the biggest message that I have is that it's okay not to be okay, and that you can be a mom and a business person and a partner and a friend and have a really fulfilled life while still dealing with some of these issues. And my journey kind of goes all the way back to childhood, when I remember pretty distinct feelings of anxiety starting from a very young age. I had trouble reading when I was little, and I remember experiences where I'd be in school and I'd be asked to stand up, for instance, in front of the class and read. And it was almost as if I couldn't even see the words on the page. I was so anxious. And at the time, today is actually my 40th birthday. So at the time,
happy birthday.
Yes.
I'm honored that you are spending an hour of your birthday with me. So thank you.
It does feel very, very appropriate. So I'm so glad, I love supporting other women and these kinds of initiatives. So, as a child, I remember, back then nobody really talked about it and no one really knew what to call it. And so I would describe the feelings I was having to my parents as these kind of racing thoughts or feelings, and that I couldn't really slow them down, but I didn't know that it was anxiety. And so life went on and we continued, our day to day. I'm absolutely a type A perfectionist personality. If it was okay, it was not great. And if it was bad, it was catastrophic. It was like very black or white for me always, with my performance in school, my performance in sports, really every facet of my life from a very young age. And it wasn't driven from my parents whatsoever. It was very much internal. And my family went through some stress, as a lot of families do. My parents actually ended up getting divorced when I was 10. And so on the heels of that, I think I just felt a bit like that, coupled with the internal dialogue that I was having, that I was never good enough and it was never enough. And what I was doing was, subpar. It really started to shift how I saw myself. And I think there was a shift in eighth grade, I would say. Eighth grade is difficult as it is. Certainly when there are other external factors contributing to some of that stress, it can be even harder. And I remember distinctly making a decision that that not only did I not like myself, that I hated myself, and that I was going to start to take out some of that pain on myself. And I decided to do that through food.
So, I just want to pause for 1 second, because I think one of the things that you just said is so important to just sort of pause on for a minute, is that it's the inner dialogue with ourselves, sure. Right? I mean, you were saying, of course you were going through stressful events in your life, with your parents getting divorced, sure. But the pressure wasn't necessarily coming from your parents to achieve and to be better. So it's the internal dialogue that you have with yourself. It's what you tell yourself, right? On a daily basis. And if you're telling yourself on a daily basis that you're not good enough, that you need to do better, you're never going to be enough, like all of these things, I think it's important, because I think as adults, we still have that, right? The internal dialogue never ends. Right. You just have to decide what that internal dialogue is going to be. So I think that's just I wanted to highlight that you're recognizing that now, that these are things that you're saying to yourself. And then you decided, okay, well, I don't like myself, and now I'm going to fight this with food. So right. Not to interrupt your story, but I think that's such an important part.
I think it's so important because, the eating disorder came and went. It was 6 years of my life. So it was a continuous struggle for a very long time. And not to make light of it, it was a nightmare. However, what I have dealt with my whole life has been the depression piece and the anxiety piece. So it's really not about moments in time. It's kind of about the entire experience and how you deal, like you were saying, with that dialogue. So as a child, I remember, I'm going to make these changes. I would write myself notes about remembering not to eat. I would begin to obsess over these behaviors. I started to eat in a very formulaic way. Everything was a ritual. It was very much a private thing that I was doing by restricting my food. And I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. I did not have any binging or purging tendencies, but I did abuse laxatives. There was just a lot of pain and aggression that I was feeling. And the more I could take it out on myself, the more I felt like I had control. And it also numbed how I was feeling, right? So after the first year of this, and everyone always questions, where was your family? Where were your parents? They were there. They saw what was happening. It's very difficult, though, to stop someone from restricting their food if they're determined to do it. Yeah. And I was in outpatient treatment pretty much from the get-go of being diagnosed. And it was still not enough. My days changed from being a normal, middle schooler, high schooler, going to school, playing sports, seeing my friends, to every day was an appointment after school, whether it be a therapist, a nutritionist, a medical doctor for a test or an evaluation, and for a long time we plateaued like that. And it would maybe get a little bit worse. And then there would be a little bit of a rebound. Some, emotional blow up would happen. And then we'd all kind of settle back in and it would continue. And that's how 6 years went by where I was dealing with this and we were dealing with it. And I think as a parent now of two young children, I can't imagine what that was probably like for my parents. I think they both dealt with it differently, but they dealt with it. There was never any questioning the authenticity of what I was doing. They believed my struggle and they believed my pain that I was having. And I think that for me, having that validated was a first step to recovery, but really I had to go so much farther.
Yeah.
And,
Well, I think, just from being a parent now, to your point, I think the one thing you learn as a parent from the time they're like babies is that you can't force anything in and you can't force anything out. Right? I mean, you can't make them eat. You can't make them go to the bathroom. For anyone who's potty trained, babies, like you realize that like it is really hard, and it's the same for teenagers, right? And so you're in control of that. And to your point, that was something that you could control, right? Exactly. It wasn't about your parents. It was about something that you could control, whether it was causing you pain and that pain was, making some other things feel better. That was one way for you to take control of the situation.
And I think for a while I thought it was working. I thought, and truthfully, my eating disorder was what I like to call completely out of control. Yeah. I had no control of my behavior.
I love that.
It was like I was being run by someone else, not only physically with my behavior, but it became, cognitive, obviously also. It's such a huge part of the disorder. So I think that, but for a while it truly felt like, okay, I'm numbing my feelings. I'm not allowing myself to process this stuff. It's being pushed away. I'm feeling pretty terrible on a regular basis, but I'm getting used to how terrible I feel. I'm exhausted all the time. Depression is just a constant, but it just felt like I could manage it to some extent, which sounds insane, I think now. But at the time, I remember thinking, I can continue on like this. And I did, for a long time until it became far, far, far too out of control.
Yeah.
And I actually had an experience where I had been restricting for so long, and obviously having a physical response to that, but also a cognitive response to that. And what happens is you become not only numb, but really unable to function really emotionally. And I think that for me, I was really lucky because I had an experience that I will never, ever forget towards the end of my battle with anorexia right before going into treatment, which included going on a trip with my family. And I wasn't allowed to do any physical activity, of course, because, burning calories was far too dangerous for me and everything was being monitored. But at the time, I felt myself slipping into what I can only describe now as like an emotional breakdown of sorts. And I think at the time, I felt like, okay, the anxiety is just getting ramped up. The depression is just getting ramped up. But I don't think I realized the severity of the situation until we were on our way back from our trip. And I hadn't been sleeping and I had been just, incredibly irritable, I'm sure my family would say, and just a complete nightmare to be around. And we got home and I was getting ready to go to bed. And my mom would say, good night, I'll see you in the morning. And I would say things to her like, I hope not. It was just, the depression was really, really intense. And I was getting myself ready to go to sleep. And I heard an auditory hallucination, which is something that can happen when someone is having a psychotic episode, which is what's going on.
For sure.
And it was the result of years and years and years of self-starvation. And what happened was I was standing there next to my bed, getting ready to go to sleep. And I heard a female voice that just said very kind of softly, this is the end. And I was 17. And I think that at that moment, I'd had the internal dialogue with myself where, you're not good enough, this, that, and the other. I'd had the internal dialogue with the anorexia, which was, you're so fat, you're disgusting, blah, blah, blah. But this was completely different. And this was almost a warning of sorts, I think, is how I interpreted it at the time. And I was horrified, and so immediately I went from wanting to be the best at my eating disorder to feeling like it had gone way, way, way too far, and terrified that it was something I wasn't going to be able to reverse, and felt truly like I was facing my mortality at that point.
At 17.
At 17.
At 17, which is,
Right.
When we're supposed to be out having fun and not even thinking that we're indestructible and
Right.
nothing can ever happen to us. And, so it is really sad to think that that's, where your mental health was at that age. And, as you're telling that story, my thought was when you heard that voice and it said, "This is the end," did you hear that as this is the end of your life? Or did you hear that as this is the end of the anorexia?
No, my life.
Your life. Yeah. Because, sometimes you wonder, like, I very much believe in the energy of the universe and
Sure.
getting the signs and stuff. Right.
Sure.
But so whatever that was meant, whatever message was meant for you, you heard it and it snapped you into, okay, I need to get better. I need to fight this. I need to not do this to myself anymore. Is that what? Yeah.
Yeah. It terrified me to the point where, sleep was very difficult that evening, I would say.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure.
We quickly called my therapist the next morning. I actually told my mom what had happened. And I can't even imagine what she was thinking.
Yeah.
I think that it was at a point where it had gone so far that we all were wondering if it was going to be able to be reversed. I think if we had been honest with one another at the time, I think that would have been the conversation.
Yeah.
And instead I went to, I had a wonderful outpatient team. My doctors were phenomenal. And one of them, who was a specialist in adolescent eating disorders, said, "You know what, it's absolutely time to be taking the next step here." So I went to have an intake evaluation for inpatient treatment. And that was interesting because this episode happened 2 days before, maybe. I think they kind of realized that this was an urgent situation and got me in rather quickly. But I distinctly remember sitting there waiting for my intake and seeing another woman sitting waiting and thinking to myself at that moment, they will never think I'm sick enough to be here.
Yeah.
I'm going to go home.
Right.
They won't think I need to be here. Right. What are we even doing here? This is a waste of everyone's time.
Right. And then again, that's just like the story that you're telling yourself, right? Where there's no evidence of that. There's no facts. It's just that self-talk and the story that you decide to tell yourself when in fact it has no truth behind it, because I'm sure you were admitted. Right?
Yes.
And we're there. And so, how long did it take you to sort of come out, to recover, to fight the eating disorder?
Well, I went in with extreme determination to turn things around. And so I went from wanting to be the best anorexic that I could be to being the best in recovery person I could be. Sun blazing, like, here I come. I'm going to do everything they want me to do. I'm going to eat every, portion. I'm going to go to every group. I'm going to talk about my feelings. I'm going to surface all these things, and I'm going to feel better, and it's going to be great. And it doesn't work that way. When you're recovering from an eating disorder, the first step is starting to fuel your body and feed your body again. And once you do that, there are a lot of physical ailments that go along with that: discomfort, lack of sleep, night sweats, constipation. Like, it's a nightmare. And your body is just kind of like, what are we doing?
It's like a caloric shock.
Then all of a sudden the emotion after a period of time start to surface. And I remember I was in a group and I was, in treatment with other women who were obviously having similar experiences. And one of them said that something really traumatic had happened to her. And I just started bawling. And I thought, I have not cried like this in years. It's probably been over 6 years since I've felt anything like this. And it was for her, but it was powerful because it was also me having this, what I describe as almost like a reawakening of
Yeah.
sorts.
And like like all of a sudden you're feeling again.
Right.
So what do you think this experience, of everything that you went through, as a child and as a teenager, how has it changed your perspective today?
I think, it's interesting because after treatment, I quickly went right off to college. And then from there, quickly moved to New York to start a career. And I had times in my life, since then that I've had to take a step back. I had to actually take a medical leave from work when I was in my first couple of years of being in New York because my depression had become really out of control again. And I wasn't with the right doctor and we weren't getting the right medication squared away and everything. And then, things were great for a really long time. And I think that I started to realize this is a continuous journey that I'm on. This is not just a hard stop at you haven't had a relapse from the eating disorder, everything is great. It's a continuous process that I have to nurture and go through. And, I have to, for me, after my son was born, I have 2 kids. After my son was born, I had another pretty significant depressive episode. And so I know for me, I have to take medication. That's just part of who I am.
Right.
This is part of my physiology, and I am wired this way, and it's okay.
Yeah. And you're owning it as part of your story, right? It's
Exactly.
part of who you are. It wasn't a snapshot in time.
No.
You are learning throughout the course of your life that this is part of who you are. This is part of your story and that it's okay. And you just have to manage it. You have to recognize the signs, right? When you're
Yep,
starting to feel
exactly.
depressed, you have to treat it
Right.
for what it is,
Yeah,
and because mental illness is just like any other physical illness, right?
exactly.
Sometimes you can treat it with holistic things and
Sometimes you
supplements
can't. Right.
and eating right, but sometimes you can't, right?
Right.
Sometimes you need to take other medicine, you need to take prescription drugs, you need to focus on what's going to make you feel best, and it's a cocktail of everything.
Right.
And I think a lot of mental health, you know it's a shame that there's just such a stigma about it still,
Right.
even at this day and age, that people are embarrassed by it. People don't get embarrassed if they get the flu, or people don't
Oh,
get
right.
embarrassed if they have other ailments to deal with.
I
If
always
they
say
have
if they're
diabetes,
right.
they're not going to say, "Oh, I'm not diabetic." They're not going to lie about it. But it's a
I
shame that
always
there's
say
still
if
that.
I had like a heart condition, I would take heart
Right.
medication.
Of
It's the same
course.
exact thing. Your brain is an organ. This is something you have to take care of. And I think what I've learned, now being a mom, and having my first kind of relapse of significant depression when I was still a young adult living in New York, having my own life, kind of running my own program, was that the world could stop for me then,
Right.
and it did.
Right.
And things were on pause. And I took 4 months to figure it out and to get better and to realign with who I needed to be talking to and all the rest of it. When it happened with my son, it was like I could see it coming from a mile away because you, of course, start to recognize the signs of your own depression. And I remember distinctly saying to myself, you cannot fall apart this time. You have little people you must take care of. You have a career, you have a mortgage, like you have responsibility, you have children who cannot see you fall apart. You need to keep this somewhere and you need to go get help for it and you need to be able to function. And so that grit is something I think I've learned too. I have a phenomenal psychiatrist who I love. I ride my horse, which is a great outlet for me emotionally. I run, walk with friends, whatever the case may be. But it's like I couldn't take a time out.
Yeah.
I had people who needed me, and I needed to be better for them.
And do you also think being able to share your story and talk about it, authentically
Very therapeutic, for sure.
and it's so therapeutic, right? Like being able to admit that, like, I was depressed, I was anxious, I
Sure.
had an eating disorder. I mean, just being able to speak it, it kind of takes all the fear out of it, right?
Yeah.
And owning that again, just kind of owning the story, owning all the parts of it, even the bad parts that sort of are part of that healing process, just to, you know, be able to share it with not only your friends and your family, but, speaking to other people that are strangers that might be feeling the same way, and knowing that you can impact them because you've gone through it and you're sharing your experience.
Yeah, I think, for me, it's been really important to share my story. I have no shame in my story. I feel like it's made me a much stronger person. I feel like some of the things that I've endured, some people may never endure in a lifetime. And that to me is a sign of strength. And I think that it's okay to ask for help. I think that people who are strong ask for help. I
Yeah.
think those are the people who ask for help. I think that, I've had a lot of experience within the medical community sharing my story with patients and inpatients and families and prospective clients and all sorts of people in that world, but also just your everyday person who maybe has a child who's going through something similar,
Yeah.
or maybe is dealing with it themselves and hasn't been able to say, I can't do this. And I'm here to say that's okay. It does not mean, it means that it is a step that you need to take forward to figure out the best treatment option for you. It does not mean that you cannot live a fulfilled life.
So that's such wonderful advice and such a great perspective. What would you say to, possibly someone listening right now who is struggling with depression or anxiety? Because we all know that, like, literally in this last year, here we are, it's
Oh,
like
here we
1 year
are, right?
anniversary. Like there are so many people struggling with mental health
Sure,
that weren't before.
sure.
And so, what would you say to someone who might be listening and not know what to do about it, like not know what step to take? What piece of advice would you have for them?
I remember when I was experiencing the depressive episode after the birth of my son, saying to myself, you know how this goes. You have been here before. This will pass, but you must hold on. You must hold on. And I would say to someone who's experiencing something similar, you have to hold on. There is help that is great out there. There's help that's not so great out there. There are ways to figure out, support from family, from friends, from medical professionals. I think that there are resources online. There are resources on, Instagram, Facebook groups, various places like that. If you can hold on and find your resource and start to reach out to whomever you feel comfortable reaching out to, this can get better. It absolutely can. And it will if you start to put the steps in place. I truly think that that is a possibility for everyone. I think that eating disorders are something that you can get through. I think that depression is something that you can manage. I think that anxiety is something that you can manage. It's okay not to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how we started the podcast. And I absolutely love that you said that it's okay not to be okay. And I think, really the key in what you said, to sum it up, is like, this too shall pass, and it will get better. But the key is you have to reach out for help. You have to you don't have to try to deal with everything on your own, right? I mean, yeah, there are some things in life we can get through on our own, but there's so many resources these days. I mean, there's even call-in
Oh,
therapists where,
absolutely.
so there's no reason for anyone to have to struggle on their own. Yet there's always a way out. There's always a resource. If you don't feel comfortable going to family or friends, the key is to reach out to someone, because this is a moment in time. This too shall pass. And it is just about hang on and find the help that you need, because you're not alone, right? There's so many people out there struggling with it, and you're not alone. And while everyone's situation is very unique to them and everyone is struggling with something different, there are many people that are struggling. That's why there's all these resources out there and available to everyone.
And I think that if people were truly their authentic selves, you would see so many people you knew dealing with these types of things. And I think that there's no shame in it.
Nope, not at all. Nope.
I think that if you can hold on and start to put the steps in place to get the help that you need, even if you don't know what that looks like, if you reach out to various resources where there are people who are professionals who do know what that looks like and who do know how to help you in the right capacity. Depression is something, unfortunately, that I know very well is a bit of a waiting game. And so once you have a depressive episode, it's not like you can just snap your fingers and it's gone. Right. Even if you start to take medication can take 6 to 8 weeks to work. It can be a great tool, but it's not for everybody. So there are so many things that you have to kind of step through to get to the other side. And I truly think if you just hold on and put the resources in place and start to take the steps, things can get better.
Kirstin, that is really such awesome advice. And, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, because, I really believe that we are in like a mental health crisis in
absolutely
in our society today. I mean, I think we were going in that direction prior to COVID.
Yep.
And this past year is just like, it's made it so much worse and it's exploded. So I thank you so much for all that you're doing and sharing your story and highlighting mental health as something that needs to be part of the dialogue. It needs to be out there. It needs to be something that we're talking about with our kids, with our friends, with our, significant others. I mean, you name it, it needs to be out there. So thank you so much for sharing your story and for creating Strength is Beautiful, which is how they can find you on Instagram, right? Yep. Strength is Beautiful is your Instagram handle. And, and do you have a Facebook page or a website?
Well. Yep.
Okay.
Facebook as well. Yep.
Awesome. Okay, great. So we'll certainly share that in the show notes, but thank you very much for being here. You're doing so much good to just, bring mental health to the forefront. And I think it's a huge, huge undertaking that we're all trying to be a part of, but we need to bring it to the conversation as much as possible.
Yeah, I completely agree. If not now, then when?
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, listeners, for joining us today on another episode of Suburban Warrior. We will see you next week. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, and drop a comment, because we would love to hear your thoughts on this episode. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week.